with pre-season drawing ever closer. And after a month of seeming radio silence, ITFC news has come like buses in the last few days. Join us now as we discuss what we know and speculate about what we don't know. This is the Blue Monday podcast. Hello and welcome to the Blue Monday podcast discussing Ipswich Town up or down since 2015. I'm Richard Woodward and this is our live stream Q&A, the show where you set the agenda on all things Ipswich Town. Joining me, he's dusted off the microphone and the laptop, Joe Fairs from Blue Monday, and a guest. We're going to grab as much information as we can. The man in the know at this time of the year, Phil Ham from TWTD. We'll start with you, Phil. How's things? Been a while since you've been on the pod. Everything good?
Yes, all fine with me, yes.
Yeah, you like this time of year or not?
This time of the year is quite good because it's quite quiet, isn't it? I think it's June tends to be fairly quiet. The last couple of years, well, 2 summers ago, certainly, we did start to get things going quite strongly. But last year, I think we made a couple of signings, didn't we? But generally, it's relatively quiet, and we can have a bit of a relax and wait for because pre-season gets going very quickly, doesn't it?
For a few, yeah. Is it Monday, guys, that it kind of officially starts? Am I right?
26th.
26th. There we go. A few more weeks to go. Joe, do you enjoy this time of year? Are you avoiding Twitter? We've got the Telegram group, which is a little bit of a bastion of saneness, but even the Telegram group were getting a little bit twitchy today, weren't they?
Yeah, it's just funny this time of year always, isn't it? It seems like there's that lull and then all of a sudden everyone seems to come back to work at the club and then the stories start dripping out. Like Chaplin, Luongo and stuff I'm sure we'll cover, but it seems like now is that sort of 2-week run up to pre-season, then it's going to be another busy one for Phil over the next few weeks as well.
Some good traffic. Well, as we mentioned, we are live. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the bits and pieces of news that we do know about. I'm going to get the guys' opinions on those. We are going to indulge very, very briefly the ITK people in social media land and just have a quick chat about the guys' thoughts on that. Phil and TWTD have just done their annual questionnaire, and it's becoming kind of an annual tradition that we talk about it on this podcast. So we'll go through some of the results, and overwhelmingly positive, as I suspect. So what I've tried to do is, in my kind of miserable get an angle to things, try and find the things that we can be mardy about, or at least look to the future about, knowing that we've talked about the season just gone to death on this podcast, and I'm sure you've written lots about it as well, Phil. So we'll try and find an angle there. But the questions are open for you guys. We'll try and get to as many as we can. If you want to stick a Q at the start of them, it helps me out. But let's say hello to some folks that we've got. Lee, that always good getting in there early doors. Lee also said 2 great signings to start the summer. Controversial, but I think Luongo signing could be the better one short term. Interesting thought. Maybe hold that in your minds, guys, when I come to you on the bits and pieces of news. Charlie's with us. Dan is with us. FBL Tractor's with us. Romeo's with us. Ben's with us. Flim Flam, Bluey, John B. Wow, this is quite the roll call. Steve's from Cyprus. Probably as temperate as it is here, Lee. Let's hope for some informed chat and less of the daft rumour mongering being seen elsewhere on town-related media sites. We will do our best, Steve. We will acknowledge it, and then we will provide a rational spin on it. I'm sure MW is with us. Norman had enough of the closed season, ready for the championship to start. Philip, Leaf's here. Neil's here, and plenty of folk here. So do get your questions in. We will come to those. Simon's here. Jim's here. Horse Hollerer. And FBL's complimenting the background. So, yeah, some egress, painting work happening here as well as at Bournemouth Road. Let's start with the easy bits and pieces of news. Let's start with the Chaplin news. Bill, 3-year extension announced on Monday, a contract to 2026, presumably a massive pay rise as well, because frankly, he's deserved it, hasn't he?
Thoroughly, yeah. I think he's been a huge success, hasn't he, really? Last season, 29 goals, 26 in the league. I think last time, Daryl Murphy got 27, didn't he? A long time since anyone got 29 in all competitions for us. From that role, he's talked to us before, sort of post-match when he scored goals, about how he's playing a different sort of role at Town than he has at other clubs. Kieran McKenna is clearly getting the best out of him. I think he was a kind of sort of old style little number 9, wasn't he? In a 2-man sort of strike force. I think that's how he's kind of talked about how he played previously. And as Freddie Sears said a couple of years ago, they don't exist in the game anymore. He said, my role doesn't exist. And I think perhaps Conor Chaplin might have found himself in a similar position, that role hasn't, the role that he kind of grew up playing perhaps hasn't existed. And he's taken it to this sort of playing in as a number 10. But in terms of a finisher, it's very difficult to remember too many better finishers at Town. I would say Alan Brazil, Marcus Stewart, Martin Reusser, people who, when the ball falls to them in the area, you think, bang, it's in. And so many of those goals that he scored, often from Wes Burns' cutbacks from the right, are just so sharp. And the goalkeeper just doesn't move. The next thing, he's looking at it and it's in the corner of his net. And no one could have. I think it was hugely predictable, wasn't it? Really, that having had such a successful season, that he would get a new contract. The 3 years, he seems very happy here, settled here. I think his dad and his brother come and watch us sit in the away end, don't they? And I think probably not the hardest deal that Mark Ashton has had to do. No. I would say that the player wanted to come here, the club wanted him here, and he's clearly a key man in Kieran McKenna's thoughts going forward.
Yeah, and Joe, someone who we as supporters love this. It's always very easy to feel very affectionate about Ipswich in the local area, but Chaplin, in his interview, his excellent interview with ITFC and our good mate Andy Warren and his new role, talked very much about how he enjoyed being in the town, the county, and obviously a key role in the ITFC Foundation as well. So that's a big part of it too, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, he's just a guy that seems to just settled into the town and feels like he's a player that wants to spend his career here, and one of those that you see all the old Ipswich players who move to Suffolk and stay here forever. Really, he looks like he's going to be one of those if he can stay here 2 or 3 years. This looks like this will be his home now. I think he's about to have his presumably first child at the moment. I think his partner is pregnant, so it all seems to be sort of going well for him on and off the pitch in that side. And I said, when we did the season review a couple of weeks back, we noted that he scored 7 goals in the first 23, or 9 goals in the first 23 games and 17 in the last 23 games of the season. And there might have even been a split. That might have been 17 and 21. That was just the middle split down the season. So the way we played in the second half of the season just opened everything up for him, having sort of Broadhead on that left-hand side, opening more space, pulling people out there, where in that first half of the season, maybe there was a lot of blocked shots with bodies in the way, but we managed to get those bodies moved out the way for the second half. And like Phil said, his finishing is just top draw. It's incredible, even on set pieces, how he manages to get on the end of set pieces, even when you think he's the smallest player on the pitch by probably about 4 inches.
Well, and got that sort of Cahill sort of ability in the air, isn't he? A little man who seems to win the ball uncannily and score goals.
Yeah, he comes alive, isn't he, in the area? And he's got a kind of, I know we ended up scoring 5 more goals in this game, but opened the scoring against Exeter, which is a game that goes down in Ipswich Town history, doesn't it? So, great to see that. And Joe, an unsurprising move, given we knew that he'd been offered terms, but Massimo Luongo's 1-year extension confirmed this afternoon as well. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, a good player to tie up. Ultimately, when you look at the players in the midfield, Ball, Evans, Kamara, Humphreys, the players that played, none of them were on the same level as Luongo was for the 16-game run at the end of the season. He just looked a mile above them. So I think it was quite important that you tried to tie him down. And I think a year's contract probably works well for both parties, because I don't think that's probably what was expected when he signed in January. I'd imagine it was just to see him through to the end of the season and then him probably go off and move back to Australia. Now he's got the move here. He's got another year of earning sort of good championship money, as opposed to sort of heading down to the A-League and winding down his career. And yeah, he's just been excellent from the moment he came. Did we lose a game when he was in the team? I don't think we did. No, lost a single game that he played. So yeah, a cracking signing, and the one outstanding is now Shawnee Aluko, isn't it? So we'll see what happens on that one. Yeah,
he'll be tomorrow. And Dan Connors on our Twitter asked whereabouts in the stadium that will be announced, given I think they've done the north and the south stand now. So maybe the ticket office, given that's closed tomorrow, that's been closed for an interview. Phil, we talked about, Joe in particular has talked about this on the pod and on our messaging group on Telegram as well. Luongo signing means there's quite an abundance of central midfielders, and we're interested, supposedly, or have been interested in Jack Taylor at Peterborough. Players are going to have to leave, aren't they, to make some room? And I think we'll get questions about this. I think Norman's asked about the budget for player signings. It feels like what we're all hearing is big names might come in and some big money might be spent, but there is going to have to be some outs to make room, aren't there, for some of these signings?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of players in that central midfield, as Joe says. Yeah, but Kamara obviously hasn't really featured at all since he came in because of injury, which obviously not entirely his fault. I could probably see him going out on loan. He's only got a year of his contract, I think, isn't he? He only signed for 2 years, so you probably see him going out on loan for the year. Cameron Humphreys, again, if he'd be better out on loan than not playing for us, I think, wouldn't he? Particularly if we're thinking of Luongo being gone in a year's time. So that
me feel sorry. On Humphreys, though, how do you think the squad registration rules affects that? Because
because he's young.
Because McKenna likes to have a big squad, and you haven't got the option of bringing in some loan players from the Premier League. So I wonder if he'll be kept around for that reason.
You might well be right. And of course, that is another kind of thing about why we might get rid of some of the other players in the central midfield, because just simply numbers. We've got, is it 25 players, including the goalkeepers, isn't it, this year? And so that makes it very tight. And I think Shawnee Aluko staying perhaps was a surprise to some people because of the kind of impact on the squad numbers. Although we all know he's a very talented player, but I think he only made about 4 league starts last year, didn't he? So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of juggling going on. I think perhaps might be more outs than people anticipate. I mean, there's fairly obvious ones, isn't there? I think Piggott will go. Obviously,
Harper
will go. Players like that aren't, are clearly not going to be in the plans. But you have to then, if Jack Taylor is signed, and I mean, clearly Ipswich made a number of bids. Dara McAntony said, didn't he, a couple of months ago, approaching £2 million for Jack Taylor in January, and they turned it down. I think if we'd have signed Jack Taylor in January, we wouldn't have signed Massimo Luongo. I think it was definitely a case of Luongo coming in on loan.
But it sounds like that we were still putting bids in right up until the deadline once Luongo had signed for.
I'm not sure
for us because
I don't know.
I think Dara did say on one of his pods, sort of right up on deadline day, there was still a couple of bids, a further bid coming in, nearly £2 million. So maybe at that point, Luongo's fitness wasn't quite what it was, and they didn't know whether they were going to get a lot out of him at that point.
Possibly, or just trying our luck. Do you know what I mean? At that point, see how their finances are at that point, and just saying, well, take this. I know that clubs have certainly done that in the past, knowing that, because obviously Peterborough's finances haven't been the most stable, have they, over the last few months? So you just sort of maybe chance your arm. But if he comes in, that does increase the numbers in the central midfield quite significantly to kind of a level that is probably a little unwieldy. But yes, I agree with you. Humphreys might then stay around just simply because of but of course then he doesn't play that often, and we haven't got the Papa John's Trophy this year, have we? In which these players kind of can tick over. But yeah, I think it's going to be quite a difficult balancing act for Mark Ashton and Kieran McKenna on that front this year, because they obviously want to strengthen, but at the same time, there's not that much scope within the EFL squad parameters.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get rid of the players you want to get rid of as well, isn't it? Because the reason you want to get rid of them is because they're not sort of up to the standards. I assume in the majority of cases they've all had a decent championship pay increase as well on promotion, so it's even harder to get rid of players that haven't featured. But like I said, when I look at the central midfield, I think you've got Morsey and Luongo that proved to be of a certain level. Evans had a good start to the season, but I think he lacks some ability maybe that you need in the championship. Don Ball didn't really do a great deal. Again, a lot of that was injuries, but I'm not convinced you'd have him starting a big run of games in the championship. Same Kamara, again, injury. So it feels like you've got 5 midfielders, but also 6, 7 if you include Harper and El Mazzuni. But it feels like the 3 senior midfielders you've got there, the Kamara, Ball, and Evans. Maybe I personally wouldn't be too worried if we lost all of them, let alone any of them, to be fair.
I think Ball is obviously quite an experienced championship player, and I think character-wise he might like keeping him around. And I think he was quite unlucky last year, because I think he said that he'd never really had an injury before that, didn't he?
Yeah.
So I always think it's quite harsh on players sometimes to kind of tar them with this sort of, being injury prone when they've maybe just had one injury. But of course, it's all we've seen of them, isn't it? And when they've been at our club. So I think that he might end up being quite an important sort of squad member, if not necessarily a week in, week out starter. But then again, we come to Lee Evans, who again has played in the Championship, hasn't he, with Wigan? I think he kind of played in that in Paul Cook's Wigan side, didn't he? Which did all right, didn't it? I know.
Well, I think because I did have a look at this when they went on their mad run towards the end of the season, which would have sort of seen them move from the relegation zone to mid-table.
But for dot points,
but for the points, he sort of dropped out the team for the last sort of 17, 18 games of the season when they won like 12 or 13 of them. So in the Championship, it seemed like he'd been replaced at that point.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where it kind of maybe his level is that sort of player that is top League One, but not quite good enough. And I think our expectation in the Championship is that we're not going to come into the Championship to finish fourth bottom, are we? We're in the Championship to push on, and I think the playoffs will be a target. I think quite reasonably, and I think they'll probably say that. I don't think they'll kind of be coy. Do you know what I mean? Or
no,
kind of...
and when you sort of to link it in with the other chat today about McKenna being linked here, there, and everywhere, part of the way they're going to keep McKenna is they're going to need to show him that they want to get out of this league this season, aren't they? They're not going to say, oh, yeah, well, stay here and we'll aim to finish 14th in the table this season. And if you do that, then we'll give you a little bit more money and see if you can finish 10th. He's sort of going to the top and we need to sort of keep up with him. So I'd imagine there's maybe some brinkmanship potentially going on with regards to funding and what levels he wants on that. But the interest in him, if it is genuine and if it does exist, is probably good for fans of Ipswich because it means it gives him a little bit more bargaining power to maybe get a little bit more out of the pension fund and
different angle, Joe. Yeah, well, let's deal with that now because it's come up in the chat, and we're always cautious to not have to read too much into unfounded internet speculation, and a lot of people getting a little bit anxious about it, understandably. So, all we can do is, and I guess reading into what the club are putting out is also not great because we've had quotes from the club this evening on the two contracts, which is to my mind positive that McKenna's giving quotes about players who presumably signed in the knowledge that he'd be there as well. But the club, Phil, can't be expected to react or respond to every little piece of internet speculation. It would just be very tedious and tiring for people, wouldn't it? So I guess we're going to have to get used to this. We've talked about this many times in the pod. McKenna's a highly sought after manager, but as Joe said, there's enough at his disposal, not least, a squad that he's put together and coached in his style. If the ambition is there, as Joe's alluding to, then we just have to stay positive, don't we? And get into the season and just ignore all this kind of stuff. And if something happens, there's not a huge amount we could do to control it, is it?
No, but I don't think there's an enormous amount of, what's the word?
Legitimacy, is that the word you're looking for?
Yeah. Not a lot of legitimate speculation. That's a good way.
Yeah.
I think John Percy wrote a story, didn't he, a couple of weeks ago in the Telegraph, and John Percy's a good journalist in the Midlands football, and I think all he said was that he's a name that's one that's sort of under consideration. Which, if you're a side that's come down out of the Premier League and are casting around for new managers, you would include Kieran McKenna. But the only thing I would say is Kieran McKenna has got Ipswich out of League One with a pretty big budget. He's not done any more than that yet. And so if you're Leicester and you're relegated out of the Premier League, your fans are going to be expecting you to bounce back straight away. If you're the chief executive of Leicester and you appoint someone, Kieran McKenna clearly is a very talented manager, but he's a very inexperienced manager and hasn't been at a club or hasn't been in charge of a club that with that sort of level of expectation at the top of the Championship. And I think it's a big risk if you're the Leicester manager to appoint someone like him. So I don't really see that he's when you've got Scott Parker, isn't it? Seems to be the sort of other name that's been mentioned quite a lot as their kind of big target. And you think, well, Scott Parker's done that job, hasn't he? He's done that job. But
yeah, I think he's off. TalkSport linking him now with Leeds, but it's
well, you can see that as well, can't you? I think they're sort of fairly similar jobs at the moment. And the other thing at Leicester is obviously has its attractions, but equally things aren't great there at the moment, are they?
No, it's got negative momentum, hasn't it? There is
actually there's a very good point about managers taking jobs at the right times at clubs. I think this is, you look at people like Paul Jewell, who went from Wigan, where he was incredibly successful, wasn't he? Or is it Bradford? One of the two. And then went to Sheffield Wednesday when they were had that negative momentum. And obviously he went to a much bigger club, didn't he? But it was a club that was kind of on the way down. And I think you've got to time your move.
Yeah, I guess there are flip sides to it, that if you look at, for example, the job Vincent Kompany's done at Burnley this year, where they came down, they looked like there's all this talk about their American owners, the financing, if they don't get it right, they're there. And he's come in, turned them around without spending a huge amount, really, got them back up to 100 points. And he's now touted as the next sort of linked with the Chelsea and Tottenham job, next Man City manager. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of attractions in the Leicester job, but I think if they wanted McKenna, or if they want McKenna, they probably needed to come after him 2 weeks ago to give him enough time to work it out and see whether that's what he wanted to do, as opposed to now when he's back from holiday, when he's started to get back into the swing of things at Ipswich, when he's now getting his targets and everything sorted there. It's probably too late, really, I think personally, but obviously we don't know.
No, but he's the other thing about Kieran McKenna. I think he's very measured in how he looks at his own development, and I'm not sure that he would see Leicester, regardless. I mean, I don't know. I think the expectation that Leicester would go back up straight away is probably not unreasonable. But you'll have players who will think they're Premier League players that probably aren't very happy with their lot. Similar to Leeds, probably as well. I think they'll both be in that position. So it's not a given, is it, that they'll come down in the and go up in the
league next season, isn't it? We keep hearing it.
It's going to be. I think it's going to be very tough at the top, isn't it? I think it's going to be a much improved division at the top, because I don't think it's been that strong a division. That seems to be the sort of the feeling. The fact that Luton, fantastically well to get promoted on a budget of what, 16 million or something. I think I read something like that. Well, our budget will be more than that. Millwall were 7th. Their budget's not going to be that. We're going to be in a fairly...
Coventry as well, wasn't there?
Coventry as well, yeah. And particularly given the start that they had with not having a ground at the beginning of the season and all that. So I think that there's some tough clubs coming down. We've not mentioned Southampton. I think that it's going to be tough at that end. But other than that, I think you look at that division, I don't think it's as strong as the division that we left 4 years ago, whatever it was.
We shall see, folks. I think the key is as I learned in GCSE history, is trust your sources, and where there's a bias, you need to look through it. Don't panic until there's something official. Is probably what
I don't hear any. What's the word? I don't hear any encouragement of the McKenna to Leicester story from
either the local papers.
Yeah, I just think it's rumours. That's the kind of steer that one is being given, that it's business as usual. And are
you hearing possibly opposite? A couple of people have asked Martin here, McKenna getting a new contract? Question mark. I mean, that would be a show of the club's ambition as well, and rewarding him for the season just gone as well. But that might be another way to ward off potential suitors as well. It might also include a massive release clause in there if the right clubs come calling as well. So is that potentially on the table for it? I mean, we can't speculate.
I did speak to Mark Ashton about it in March, and he said, that will take care of itself when it takes care of itself, sort of thing. But I mean, I think it's an obvious moment if you're Kieran McKenna's agent to come to the club and say, well, my boy's done well for you, we'll have a new deal. And I think that, I'm sure it's something that's been under discussion. I'm sure it is. It wouldn't surprise me at all if there was another very similar situation to Conor Chaplin. I think that that having done
save
well,
him up, build up as the week goes on.
Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, I've not heard anything to suggest that anything's imminent, but it wouldn't entirely surprise me. That I think going back, George Burley, he signed a contract soon after we got promoted, I think, didn't he? Or soon after we got into, I forget which one, either got promoted or got into Europe. But you reward your managers and players, don't you, for success? And
I'll be less surprised if McKenna signs a new contract than I was on New Year's Day 2020 at Wickham.
Yeah, well, I think that had been dragging on for so long. It's one of those things, isn't it? You sort of drag on to the point where your manager's no longer being successful, don't you? And you still still sign it. So I mean, that was just ridiculous. I mean, less said the better.
Let's move it on. Neil, question on new contracts or new signings. Any thoughts? We can only guess at this point. Joe, we mentioned surely Luca might get a contract reveal as well, but it's a 50-50 toss of a coin. What's your bet if anything happens tomorrow?
I just wonder whether Aluko does even sign the new contract, whether it is there's an offer there, but he sort of is aware that, well, he didn't appear in a match day squad post the 0-0 draw at Bristol Rovers this season. So he was very much out of the picture, and he's going to be even less in the picture, you'd imagine, in the championship season. So it might be that he doesn't even sign the contract. We've offered him one as a goodwill, not a goodwill gesture. I'm sure he's done it there, but because we like him and we want to keep him around the place. But I don't know if that would be enough for him. So maybe it goes that way. And so I'm sure there's signings being worked on now. It's just a case of trying to get some of those over the line. But I guess a new contract for somebody is always easier to announce than a new signing. Maybe I think you got Sam Morsey, whose contract is up at the end of next season as well. So there's a couple of obvious candidates to get something.
Yeah, maybe the players who signed, because Burns signed one. Didn't Burns sign one last season?
Yeah,
as well?
Burns and Wolfie signed one last season.
So they would be the obvious candidates because everyone else is probably on good wages. So it's about securing them a bit longer, isn't it? Romeo, very quickly before we move topics a little bit, do we know if the pitch transformation is on track? Does Phil know if we've asked to move the first two fixtures away or just one? Just one. There you go. Confirmed.
You can't offer two.
I thought that'd been out in the ether as well. Worth noting that we like plugging the Telegram group. I hope you can understand why, because it's a really good thing for us, and it's a really good thing, hopefully, for the community that make it so great. But Craig has got exclusives on the Telegram group of whether he's going to get in massive trouble now, and I've ratted him out there. But so there may or may not be some pictures there that might give you an answer, Romeo, in our Telegram group. Let's skip conversations. We will come back to your questions, though. We are here for a lot longer, so put a Q next to it, and I will come through all of these. We will try, if we can, to avoid comment about speculation. I think we've dealt with McKenna now, so I'm going to avoid those. I've seen some what-if scenarios and all that kind of stuff. I think just for everyone's sanity and well-being, I think we move on from that topic conversation, unless something pops up on. I think Joe's got his phone ready. I've got feeds up over here as well. So if something happens while we're on air, we'll react to it. But otherwise, I think we'll try and avoid, if we can, the massive speculation. Phil, the annual TWTD questionnaire, how long you're into, like, is it 2 decades yet that it's been going?
Well, the questionnaire was actually going in the fanzine before I took it on.
So it's more than that, maybe, then.
So yes. So I mean, I think Gavin Barber and Phil Arnold, who were doing it before me, I sort of took it on in December 94. So so it was certainly going in 93, 94. So yes, 30 years. So well, the next one will be the 30th, won't it? So and we've been doing it online for it's I think 15 that we've got in the current bit of software that Gavin Wilding wrote. And then
the Osborne 2.0, is it now?
That's a joke, because there is actually a computer called an Osborne in the 70s. That's that's a sort of in joke for the sort of IT
nerds. There you go.
Yeah.
All the Easter eggs are coming out now, but and I guess the question is something that we debate here on Blue Mondays: do you get more traffic in good times or more traffic in bad times? I can imagine it's probably a little bit of both, but if it's been a crap season, and let's be honest, the last few years have been pretty crap, I'm pretty certain people are queuing up to fill in the questionnaire, to at least as a route to vent. Have you had less or more responses this season?
More this year. I think it was 3,000 plus this year. I think it was almost 1,000 up on the previous year. But there is a bit of one thing or the other. I think if we're doing bad, I think the website as a whole is like that, isn't it? I think if things are going well, then there's a lot more traffic, and if things are going very badly, then there's a lot more traffic. But it's that kind of 15th place in the championship every year. That's when I think traffic drops off a bit. But the questionnaire, I think this year everyone was delighted to be able to say something nice about stuff around not just the on pitch performances, but off the field as well, because there's improvements. Whereas I noticed and it is noticeable that over the years that certain areas, like the club responding to emails and things like that, were pretty much the same every year. And I'd go and say to Simon Clegg or Steve Pearce or who I happen to kind of be liaising with. Look, this really ought to get better, and they sort of say, well, we do our own research, and that's kind of not how we find it, sort of thing. What we find from our research, and so. But I mean, some of that is the fact that things were staffed at a fairly skeleton level in some areas of the club. So to some extent, you can't really blame people or be too harsh on people. And obviously, the club is now staffed on a much more widely, and the departments are much deeper. So yes, I think so. People this year were particularly sort of pleased they can come in and say, yes, this was great, and type, click the excellent box or the very good box far more often than they have done in for 2 decades.
Yeah, it was stark. I mean, I've got some examples here. I mean, Kieran McKenna with his 97.7% very good rating, and
well, his agent will be bringing that to the meeting when he's discussing the
exactly
the new contracts.
Look at the size of the pie. Game changer 94.9% very good rating as well. None of these particularly surprising, but Mark Ashton a little bit lower there, 91.8. Always
it's a Bristol City fan. So
he's been infiltrators maybe, and then 96 rating the season overall very good, 97% there. No surprises. I like the questions though where there's a little bit more variety, and I'd be interested to get both of your thoughts on some of these categories. First one, goal of the year. I mean, we talked about this, Joe, quite a lot on our pod, and recommend go and watching our season reviews, 2-parters, and the season awards where we awarded our goal of the season, I believe, as well. But no surprises there, Phil. Really, I think maybe the Broadhead goal perhaps rating higher than maybe I thought, but
we ended up with the Hurst goal, didn't we? Here,
Hurst goal.
Yeah, Barnsley.
See, I like which one is it? The Bolton one.
Okay.
Just having played as a striker, not at any particular level, but just the difficulty of the volley of a wet ball coming at that angle. Do you know what I mean? Into that corner. I thought that was,
cipher volley was
had quite a level of difficulty if we sort of put it in terms of skating or diving or something. But again, the Barnsley goal was terrific as well, and also, and I think this is something as with the Broadhead free kick, it was the context as well.
Yes.
The Hurst goal at Barnsley, literally we're still writing up the first goal, and he sort of he just holds. One thing I wondered about the goal, well, he deliberately let the ball run behind him because it gave him so much space, didn't it? And I don't think he did, but. It was it just gave him so much space. And again, the finish.
Sort of second goal being so quickly after the first goal, wasn't it? And it just made that was sort of the moment we were up, really, wasn't it? There,
I agree with you. And again, the finish for him, his finishing was terrific, wasn't it? Once he got going, his finishing was superb, and I think that was that kind of took us up and really, the January signings were so terrific. Perhaps it's something else you might come to, but the free kick against Sheffield Wednesday at 2-0 down to one of our promotion rivals, things hadn't been going that well, had they, from when we lost to Wickham, I think, in what was that, December the 18th, something like that. And I think that was really important. It got us back into that game. I know we didn't win the game on the Tuesday at Bristol Rovers, which I think was the following Tuesday, wasn't it? But I think that was quite an important step, really. I think it kind of was the first step into that sort of still quite remarkable run that took us over the line, and not just over the line, kind of. I mean, I think if it
catapulted us, didn't it, over the line?
Quite a long way, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Match of the season or worst match of the season. As I said, I'm trying to find some of the negatives where there might be some variety here. That Lincoln home match, what was that? The only defeat at home in the league, I think it was. Oxford away in the fog. Charlton comes up there. Any thoughts to add on to those ones, guys? Or do we want to move on from the negative?
Like for me, because I filled in the survey, and I think I went for the Lincoln home game just because it was the only home game we lost. But it did feel like when you're trying to find the worst game of the season, there wasn't really a standout bad game. And in the sort of previous seasons, there might not have been a standout bad game, but it's normally because there's been so many bad games that you sort of think, oh, which one do I pick? And you sort of flick through the result. Oh, yeah, that was crap, so I picked that one, rather than flick through them all and make a sort of balanced assessment of which one was the very worst then. But this one, it's just, which ones actually were bad? I thought, oh, well, we lost one game at home. That's got to be the worst one because I was at that game and we lost that. But even then, we sort of still played well. Like,
shouldn't have lost.
I think if you looked at probably the games all season where we didn't play well, I think you probably got Burton away, where we sort of won very early in the season. We didn't play particularly well, and maybe the Fleetwood at home game where
Cambridge away.
second half they did that. Yeah,
Cambridge away.
Cambridge away, first half especially was poor, but you're talking probably 3 or 4, or maybe sort of 4 bad halves of football in a season, and
I know.
then a couple of bits from there.
Yeah,
I think I
too
did
good.
some maths. We were only behind for something like 291 minutes or something over the whole season, something like that.
Well, somebody there was one of the journalists, sort of the top national journalist, was tweeting about Man City and saying how the league's becoming too easy for them, and it showed their last run over 15 games, how many goals they'd scored, how long they'd been ahead for in each game, and somebody put our record against it, and it was almost identical to what Man City's was in their sort of their annual race to the title, where they just sort of get there and all of a sudden they hit their stride for the last sort of 15, 16 games of the season, and our 15, 16 run of the season was almost exactly the same as theirs to the minute with regards to how long we'd been ahead for. And I guess this is the sort of stuff when we talk about when McKenna's only had one season at Ipswich where he's had a heavily budgeted team and got them out of the league. That's the sort of things that is more noticeable in the football community, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly right.
I think that's right. I think it kind of shows. I mean, that's obviously gives us heart for going into the Championship, because we've not just been a decent League One side in the last third or quarter of the season. We've been absolutely outstanding League One side, and I think that's. I think that's a fair point.
Probably
really,
the best ever League One side in that last sort of half of the season, when you look at the actual metrics of it and the odds that we're going out at the start of each game, because the underlying numbers are so good. There's never been a team that's put that sort of run together. When you look at our home run going into it, and it's like 3-0, 4-0, 4-0, 3-0, 2-0, 6-0. There was no let up on it. It wasn't like, oh, you've won 8 out of 9, but you've a couple of late wins, a couple of 1-0s and 2-1s. Every single game is just a dominant victory from that point on, other than the Port Vale game and the Cheltenham away game.
Yeah, and the games that were seen as hard matches: Bolton away, Derby away, Barnsley away,
Peterborough away,
2-0, 3-0, whatever it was. Yeah. We just prep them aside.
Other bits and pieces as well. I have to draw attention to this because I thought there might be a backlash against Barry Bannon, and you have to call him Barry Bannon now. Opposition player of the season. Mumba's in there, Whittaker's in there, Cooper's in there. I found this a difficult one to pick. I don't think I picked Bannon in the end, but your thoughts on how? I guess it's easy because he's such a well-known player at League One level, and pivotal, I guess, with Sheffield Wednesday. But I didn't recall him being particularly influential in the games against us. Might be harsh, might be wrong. Thoughts, Phil?
I think Windass was probably their most influential player against us. I don't know. It's certainly the game at Pullman Road.
Byers was the best of the ones at game as well when he played as well, and he scored a good goal and was good.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think Bannon is. I mean, he does tick them over, doesn't he? In the sort of manner that Jim Magilton did with us back in the day. He's that sort of player, and he's also, I think he's sort of talismanic, isn't he, for Sheffield Wednesday now? For he's sort of, you kind of, if you're thinking of a Sheffield Wednesday player, he's the one that comes to mind. So perhaps he kind of came into people's kind of also the fact that I think I put that together sort of just after the playoff final, and so everyone had heard his name about 5 million times from the commentator during that match.
It's worked.
I know, yes, he sort of inculcated it into everyone's mind. The one that amused me was Mumba coming second as a Norwich player.
Yeah.
But then he did score 2 good goals against us, didn't he? 2 big, important goals against us. But I thought he really struggled at Portman Road defensively. I thought he had a really poor game. But then pops up in the 96th minute. It wasn't that late. It was at 90th minute to score the equalising goal for them after scoring at their end. He probably was the player that had the biggest impact against us, wasn't he, over the season?
Yeah, maybe. He was very good at home park.
Yeah. Fair enough. And obviously Plymouth, we didn't beat Plymouth. Well, we didn't beat Sheffield Wednesday either, but Plymouth beat us. At least we drew with both games against Sheffield Wednesday. In terms of moving us forward to next season, the question, one of the last questions is where will the Blues finish in the Championship next season? A little bit of a sliver for top 2, but a big chunk there, probably bigger than I was expecting, Phil, for playoffs. I think I went mid-table, but playoffs getting a big chunk there. A lot of confidence, as you say, at the end of the last season, pretty impressive. Were you surprised by that?
Not especially, actually. I just think the mood is like that, isn't it? At the
Mhm.
moment, the way we finished the season, the confidence that's there, the confidence in the team and the manager, and also the off-field kind of operation at the club to strengthen over the summer. I think people are anticipating another good season. I don't think if we're mid-table, I don't think people will be distraught.
No.
But I think at the same time, I think they really see us as, and also what I said before, people see Luton being in the playoffs, Coventry, Millwall being there or thereabouts, and think, well,
Why not?
you know, we're a bigger club than they are, and so I think that they look at it and I think they feel this is a real chance. I think generally the feeling is that the Championship hasn't been as strong in recent years, and so there is a bit of an opportunity, and it's been done before, hasn't it? And clubs have come out of
and lesser clubs in Ipswich as well.
much lesser clubs than Ipswich, yeah. And I know we've talked before earlier about the teams coming down. I think there will definitely be a force, but you know, there's not 6 of them, is there? Do you know what I mean? And I think so that and the teams that came down last year, quite a disappointment in some cases. So
some of them have got a little bit of off-field dysfunction as well, which is helpful too.
Yeah.
So
I mean that will happen. I think with the clubs coming down this year, I think Leicester is probably the one that seems most likely to have a fair amount. There's already kind of whispers that things are not great behind the scenes there. So I think Southampton will probably find it quite difficult to adjust, don't you? Because they've been up for quite a number of years. I think that always takes a little while, whether they ultimately come through.
Signed a lot of young players last season, didn't they? And it just hasn't worked at all. So you sort of, when you do that, they might be able to sell Lavia or someone like that for a lot of money, but they're left with the young players that didn't make the jump to first team football. They'll lose Ward-Prowse, so they've then lost their sort of only one real senior player. So they're sort of stuck in that limbo, really, of a strange squad. But I think when you look at the football we play and the style of football we play, there is that definitely the way that should work in the levels above. It almost feels like when George Burley was managing us in the Championship or Division 1 as it was, it felt like once we do get up, we'll be fine because we've got a style that's going to go. And obviously we went sort of straight up into 5th place in the first season because we had a style of play that just worked better probably at that level than it did at the level we were playing it at. And it does feel that. But the only worry for me is when you see, like, as sort of John's mentioned comments there, Luton and Coventry, they sort of became such battle-hardened, defensive, solid teams, don't they? That whilst the games, when you watch them, they look like crap games, it's because both sides are just cancelling each other out. So you wonder how we deal with that.
Interesting. How did you vote on that question, Joe? Just out of interest.
I think I went for playoffs, but I'd probably put
You're
us
Mr. Confident, though, aren't you?
In that sort of 5th to 10th range. I'd put us.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, I think
I was going to say is that we had, towards the end of the season, we had James Scowcroft and Jason Dezelle on Life's Pitch. And Jason obviously watched a fair amount of Championship football last year because of Andre, and Scully obviously works for Crystal Palace, so scouts quite a lot at Championship football. And both of them thought that from what they'd seen that we would be contenders in the Championship. So I think that's quite
notable.
Well, I think when you look at the transfer business we did in January, it shows roughly what the transfer business is going to be like this summer when you're signing players like Nathan Broadhead for a good size fee, Harry Clark for a good size fee. Those two players alone show you that when you get up, you're probably going to be able to sign some of those £2 million players. You're not going to be a Rotherham or a side Barnsley or a side like that where they come up from the League One and it's just we need to try and stay here because we maybe gravity is going to be pulling us back to League One. We feel like we're back to the level we should be at as a minimum, really. So, and with the spending power to compete at this level as well.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think those signings that you mentioned there, Broadhead, Clark, there'll be those type of signings, won't they? Those sort of 23, 24 players, probably from academies, Premier League academies that have perhaps been on loan in the Championship or maybe in League One if they've done particularly well. George Hurst obviously comes to mind as one that potentially we could look at again coming in. Players like that will have a sort of value going forward. Mark Ashton's talked a lot about the Adam Webster signing that he made from us when he was Bristol City manager, CEO. Someone that they brought, I can't remember what the figure was, but it was something like 5-7 million, wasn't it? Something like that. And it was sold a year or so on for 20 million to having.
It was like 3.5 to 25 or something like that, wasn't it?
Something, yeah, it was much lower than we thought there. But yeah, great points, guys. I'm going to move us on because we're going to time out. But really great chat there, and all the results. Phil has tweeted that earlier, and we've retweeted it as well. But head to TWTD anyway for
it's on the front page.
On the front page, but all of your news on TWTD as well. A few things to plug before we finish with everyone's questions. Worth noting at the moment, you can get some Blue Monday merch with free shipping. Get yourself a t-shirt or something like that. Head over to Blue Monday ITFC.co.uk for the link for that. You'll also find the link for Telegram and join us there. We have a transfer chat. We've ring fenced it away. So if like me, you can't bear to look at it, or if you want to troll a few people and post some stupid links, which frankly are happening. And sometimes it's me doing that as well. Head over to Telegram, 2 weeks on us, and then a subscription thereafter, but plenty of exclusive. We had a Q&A with Nick Ames recently, which went down really well. Nick, Guardian football journalist and friend of the pod as well. So head over to Telegram and join in the fun over there. Let's head back, shall we, to some questions. I'll try and alternate these if we can try and keep the answers short and sharp, guys. Give us as much time as possible. Flim Flam, anybody think there'll be a scramble to offer contracts to Wigan players in the Championship? Who would you take? Joe, do you want to take that one?
It's the obvious one is Will Keane, who we were linked with at the back end of the summer window, I think it was. But he's now, it turned out that he had signed a contract extension when no one was really sure whether he had or not. I think him and James McLean had signed extensions. So I don't know. I think they are still continuing to pay the players who have got contracts. So their contracts are not becoming null and void. But yeah, I guess he's one. He had a half decent season in the Championship last year. There was a defender that we had a sort of rough link with earlier, wasn't it? Charlie Hughes, was it? Who teenager played sort of 20 games for them last season, but yeah, one of those. I guess we'll
be shopping a bit higher than maybe Wigan in terms of players going out. Phil, we obviously spoke a little bit about some of the midfield. Sully, our mate Sully in New York. Caden Jackson, Championship or League One next season? Thoughts on that, Caden Jackson?
It's interesting you mentioned Charlie Hughes. I think someone mentioned to me there were Premier League clubs interested in him, but presumably for a development squad sort of, because he's that sort of age, isn't he, still? So be interesting to see what happens there. I've heard his name mentioned as well. Caden Jackson, yeah, well, if we bring someone in on the right to play a sort of that kind of Wes Burns role, which you could potentially see happening, then Caden Jackson's down the pecking order that bit further. So it wouldn't entirely surprise me if he ends up going somewhere. Having said that, he only signed a new contract relatively recently, didn't he? Was it last summer?
He signed a 2-year deal last season, so he's got a year to run on it.
So maybe, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, perhaps to some degree that's to sort of protect his value. If we were to go up, and he was perhaps seen as one we would more as a sort of long-term League One player if we were in that scenario. But yeah, I could certainly see him going, because I think that sort of right side is one of various people have been mentioned for sort of that role. Chijozi Ogbene has been mentioned, isn't he? I don't think there's anything in that from what I'm told.
Raksaki keeps coming up.
Raksaki, I think there's definitely something in that. And there was in January. So it wouldn't entirely surprise. I don't think that's one that will happen immediately, but I think that might be one that could happen later in the summer. Do you know what I mean? I think
depending where he ends up, or
I think Palace will have a look at him, or maybe need him through their sort of pre-season, because obviously these Premier League clubs tend to be quite short of players through their pre-seasons.
It sounds like Wilf Zaha's going to leave as well, doesn't it? He's sort of, his contract has run out, so it sounds like he'll be going, and it's a player that could potentially play a role like that, but maybe as a backup, not as a starter.
Yeah, yes, I think that's, and that would then put Jackson as one of those who could potentially move on, which would be a bit of a shame, because he's obviously played a role in getting us up. But as you move up,
never been a routine starter, has he?
No, he's never been a starter. I think Kieran McKenna has found a role for him, but it's usually been as a backup to Wes Burns, isn't it? I think there was a time last season when they were starting to kind of think, because Burns was not at the top of his game, was he, for a spell? And I think there was sort of suggestions that Jackson might be given a bit of a run to see how he did, but obviously then Burns kind of hit his straps, didn't he? And
he did. Yeah. and the rest is history.
Yeah.
FPL Tractor, I'll go through some of these comments quickly. Better to have a manager. Other clubs are interested in one. They're not. Evening to John. Birmingham fan, good. Glad you guys back in the championship. These shows are back on my watch this year. We'll be covering the opposition teams, giving our respect to everyone every week. John, so great to have you with us. I'm interested to see how Blues get on this summer, new ownership and all that fun stuff. A lot of speculation. As I said, if you join us late, and please, if you've been with us since, even if you've just joined us, thumbs up by the way as well. Don't forget to subscribe. Plenty more content coming our way, coming your way. But I think we're going to avoid the speculation on the manager situation at the moment. Norman, Joe, what do you think of the business Norwich have done? They are going to be some force in the 2017-18 season. Ryan Fraser linked with a loan. I think a number of clubs linked with Ryan Fraser on loan, but Norwich seemed biggest noise there. And obviously Stuart Webber leaving. You're muted, Joe, by the way, so I'm going to keep talking. Stuart Webber on his way too.
Yeah, it seems like sort of one extreme from the other, doesn't it? Where they've sort of always gone for sort of younger players, maybe trying to play to value, and then all of a sudden they signed Ashley Barnes, Shane Duffy, and there's a couple of others they've picked up in there, isn't there? Fullback from somewhere, and Stacey, is it from Bournemouth? And you think, I think the squad did need rebalancing, but I'm not sure they're particularly. So they're probably. I think Ashley Barnes is a good signing, maybe to help bring through Adam Eder as a striker, but it does seem like it's one last throw of the dice for the last year of parachute payments, and if they don't get up this year, I think they're going to be in a real struggling position to try and compete in this league as of next season, unless they get new ownership, because the owners don't put in any funds at all, do they? They don't have the money to put in, so they have to sort of run at a zero balance effectively. Stuart Webber leaving, I think he's run his race at Norwich. I think when you look to see where the club was when he came in, I think they're in a lot better position now than what they were sort of off the field, especially their facilities are of an absolute another level to what they were when he came in, and he's had some great signings, sort of Buendia, Pookie, especially those two are the ones that really stick out. Daniel Farke did well there, but he seems to have sort of lost his mojo a bit. You listen to his end of season.
Mardy in the press, wasn't he? I'm surprised he's knowing now that he handed in his resignation in March and then spoke to the press towards the end of the season. I'm surprised they let that happen, but maybe let himself down a bit there, perhaps.
Yeah, it reminds me of when Mick McCarthy was at Ipswich, where he'd done undeniably a good job, and he knew he'd done a very good job, and Stuart Webber knows he's done a very good job at Norwich, but maybe when the job became just sitting in the middle of the championship, which is probably where you should expect to be on the budgets that Ipswich had at that point, or was probably overperforming for Ipswich at this point, and Stuart Webber doing that for Norwich now, you're allowed one bad season, and I don't think the fans appreciate that sometimes, but it's then not up to the manager or the sporting director to say, well, actually, you're lucky to have me. I'm doing a good job. If you can't see that, that's your fault. And I think that's where they sort of fell down on it. And I think they'll be glad to see the back of him, but maybe it won't be the best thing for the club. But I think it needed a change, like Ipswich did when.
Yeah, agreed.
Obviously, hopefully it goes as badly for them as it did when Mick left us.
I think managers and CEOs, they have a shelf life at clubs, don't they? I think, and
6 years he's been there.
That's surprising. It's as long as that, really. But yeah, I think it's notable how many people have been leaving Norwich. I mean, quite a lot of our staff are from Norwich, the academy staff and people like that. So I don't think it's been a happy show. As you say, the comments recently, I mean, that just had "I'm on my way" written all over them, didn't they? The comments about the women's team and all that. I just thought, he was just clearly demob happy. And
I wonder if there's even an attempt to sort of get pushed out the door a bit earlier. Now he's sort of handed his notice in, whether there's a case of, look, if I just push it, they might just say go early.
Well, he's linked with Leeds, wasn't he, this morning as well?
Yeah, I've heard his Leeds. Someone mentioned to me that they thought he was going to go to Leeds. So
interesting. That'd be good. Feisty, wouldn't it?
Well, apparently it's been on the cards for a little while, presumably under the previous owners, and then you've got new people coming in now, haven't you, at Leeds? So that might all get kind of resolved now. That's but yes, it's obviously not ideal for any club to be going into a transfer window, which obviously starts tomorrow, doesn't it? With the director of football moving on. So
big question marks, and he's exactly right. Really interesting one, that one. We'll see how that plays out, hopefully in our favour. A few questions in the chat asking news about Town TV and news about kits and news about players flying out to Austria. Phil, I'm in the dark on that one. Do you know any more about that kind of stuff very quickly on those bits, or should we just tell people to wait and keep their eye on the official Twitter feed?
Yeah, I think that. I think kits will be fairly soon. I think the club will be making announcements on that fairly sharpish. Austria, I think we all know that they're going to go to Austria for a week. The match on the 15th
Of July?
July.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Of course.
Although there will be
It's 2 days' time, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. From what I gather, there'll be a surprise in the announcement when it's made. Obviously, more friendlies to be announced. Yeah, I mean, obviously, no home friendly this year because of the pitch. I think there's going to be no open day this year because of the pitch situation.
Oh, wow, of course, yeah.
It's
a shame.
What else?
Town TV.
Town TV. Yeah, I think they're just working their way through it. I think it's.
They've got I follow contract's got to expire first, doesn't it? Similar to Adidas at Umbro, isn't it? You can't do anything until.
Yeah, I think that's officially up, but I think that there's all that kind of thing that's that they're in kind of working on now. I think they're going to have sort of a number of regular presenters and whatever, and
coming for us, aren't they?
yeah. Well, perhaps we'll discover who's been poached for it and who hasn't. Like the early days of Sky TV when
exactly right.
That's the day commentators suddenly disappear from one.
Poaching of Blue Monday team members starts now. No, I've heard nothing. I can't confirm otherwise. Joe might have irons in the fire. I don't know. Who knows?
Can I use this pod to issue a come and get me?
I was going to say. Yeah. Moving on. Romeo, the question for both of you guys: what championship grounds are you most looking forward to visiting? Phil, start with you quickly.
Are there any new ones? I can't even.
Joe's done his 92.
No, because I went through my 92 today to see how many grounds I need to go to in the championship, and it's just Plymouth and Swansea I've not been to. So there's no new ones because we've played at both those grounds before.
Boring, Phil.
I'll be looking forward to get back to like Millwall, QPR, the sort of nice London days.
We had a question.
Comfortable. I think looking forward not to having to go to Fleetwood, Accrington.
I was going to say
places like that are really kind of not very comfortable places to work. Do you know what I mean? Where you're sort of crushed with people very close.
Who looks after you?
It's like Phil, being back in the North Stand, Phil, with your notepad, isn't it?
Back in the day, it's very much like that. So so it'd be a bit nicer being at the. I used to live in Hull, so I quite like going back to Hull. I usually have lunch with a friend of mine when I go up there. Swansea, I always quite like going there. That's quite a nice. But just generally, the sort of level of stadium goes up a little bit, doesn't it? And and I think more than anything, I think we're just a bit bored of League One. I think the lack of competitive matches, I think, was the biggest thing.
The scrabble for tickets as well is tedious as well, and you've got 1,000
for away games. Certainly, I think that's it's a scrabble to get tickets for home games now.
Well, exactly right. Yeah, it might not be much easier next season. Matthew asked about the transfer kitty. Realistically, how much? I guess we can only speculate on that, but we're hearing
millions,
ambitious signings, aren't we, guys? I think that's all we can really say on that.
I think we'll be pushing FFP as far as we can because I think there's a real intent to try and get up within the club.
Which obviously is something you've got it's over 3 years, isn't it, in this division? So it's a cumulative 3 years as you go, isn't it? So I think you can only push it so far, can't you? But I think they're not going to mess around. I think that they're not going to spend 2 or 3 years establishing ourselves in the championship by any stretch of the imagination. No. They will be aiming to go to be competitive at the top end.
Yep. Our mate Leaf asks, given player trading is a key part of the pension fund strategy, what is a realistic current market value for Walton, Wolfen and Burns and Chaplin? Presumably individually, Leaf, rather than as a big lump sum quadruple signing. But thoughts on that one, guys? Joe, you're a big fan of Wolfen.
Value to us, isn't it? I guess it's a value to us, and I don't think any of them would. I don't think anyone's going to be bidding what it's going to take to get them away from us. Because
let me start an auction then. Would you 5 million for each of them? Is that a fair price?
I think you'd take that for Burns and Walton, especially a keeper and a keeper and a right winger. They're probably not. Their value's not really going to go much past that, is it? I don't think Chaplin would be too valuable to us. I don't think you get anything like that, but I think that's the sort of money it would take to lose.
I think that it would cost us more
did-
to replace them than anyone would offer us at the moment. I think.
And to be fair to Leaf, he said realistic, didn't he? So
Mm.
I've maybe, yeah.
I think January, if we've had a great first half of the season, and they've in particular have had a great first half of the season, do you know what I mean? Proven themselves in the Championship, then I think perhaps, you know, we might get offers that are more, that we would consider more. But then again, if we've done that well, we probably wouldn't look at offers in January because we'd be looking at going up. So
Exactly right. Spending some more.
There's a certain profile of player that's always going to get more. Where if you look at someone like Wes Burns, he's 28. He's been a sort of a lower league player for most of his career. He's been excellent for us and bring a lot of goal contributions. But I think he's the sort of player that's going to need to go up with the clubs to get to higher levels. Where someone like Luke Wolfenden, for example, who's 23 years old, 6'3", fast, reads the game well, and can pass the ball at the back. He's a sort of player that is going to interest clubs because it's a sort of very rare profile of player and the player that the top clubs want. So any club like an Adam Webster, where you think, actually, if we get him and he plays like we want him to, he's a player that could be worth a hell of a lot of money, where I don't think the others probably are in the list there. Like Conor Chaplin, brilliant for us, but he's always going to be 5'6", and which Premier League team is going to say, "Oh, we're going to buy him to go up there and get him to score us the goals"? You just don't see that with the sort of level of athleticism, physicality.
Walton, I think Walton, he could be.
Always lots of rumours with Walton, isn't there, Phil? Borough were linked with him. You know, I think other teams were linked with him last season as well. He's always the name that on teams' lists for keepers, isn't he?
Yes. I mean, I could certainly see someone. I mean, Borough now we're up. Borough are the same level as us, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? That's not a kind of step up for him. So I think if he does well in the Championship, you could see Premier League clubs looking at him. I think just to see whether they.
As a number one, though.
No, I was going to say I don't think he'd go in as a number one because, well,
who does?
Many goalkeepers come out of the Championship and go in as number ones in the Premier League these days, but. It's very difficult to turn down the chance of a Premier League club, isn't it? Even if you're perhaps not going to be the number one immediately. So I could see it, but I mean, you know, it's all hypotheticals, isn't it? I think it all kind of depends. I think at the moment, because these players have only largely impressed in League One, the value that we would get for them is not as much as it would be once they've impressed in the Championship.
Very quickly, just Michael's question here. Good day to Michael. Who'd be sold for big money? I mean, wishing our players away, but I guess in terms of who's got the highest value in the 11, maybe reword the question. Leaf Davis.
I'd say so now. He looks like the player that will definitely play in the Premier League, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he's obviously had a very, very good first season, and Leeds were probably looking at it and thinking, why did we sell him a year ago? Because he would probably be a starter in their team this year, wouldn't he?
I think even someone like Nathan Broadhead, you could probably make a good profit on already.
Yeah, Welsh international now, isn't he? So.
Yeah, I think Broadhead, this sort of thing of Everton seem to hang on to players for years, don't they? I mean, you think Broadhead, you think young player, well, 25, isn't he? And he's been at Everton being sent out on loan year after year after year. I don't think it's really ideal for players. I think Everton. One of my cousins is an Everton fan, and he said, he should have been given more of a go at Everton. And he said he's not the only one. They've had players that they've just...
Fighting relegation, isn't it? It's tough to gamble on.
Yeah, well, it doesn't necessarily mean last season or whatever, but...
Different managers coming in
pre-season.
all the time, and then you're bringing in a load of their own players, and you've got two different people in the boardroom. Like, you got the owners bringing in one side, the director of football bringing another. There was one summer where I think they signed Wayne Rooney... is it Van der Beek and Gylfi Sigurdsson? They sort of signed 3 number 10s because one of them was a manager's choice, one of them was the owner's choice, one of them was a director of football's choice. And it's like, when you're doing that, if you're a number 10 in the academy and you've got 3 being signed above your head already, then what are you going to do from there?
But this seems to be happening with Luke Garbutt came to us in a similar sort of position, didn't he?
Matt Pennington.
Yeah, and it just seems Mark Ashton has talked about warehousing and said that our academy previously used to warehouse players just because they were too scared to let them go because we're making a mistake. Well, I think if you're getting players to 25 and still not in and around your first team, you've failed, haven't you? Really already?
Yeah. Well, so is the players' agent to an extent, but anyway, I need to move us on, guys.
20 grand a year, they're not.
Well, that's
a week, they're not.
True. We're over time, but I'm going to go another 5 minutes of extra time if that's all right, guys. To Phil and Joe, I'm going to rattle through these questions, but I need you to help me out by giving succinct answers. FPL Tractor asks, have you found it harder to get information out? Has he found it harder to find out info in the US/Ashton era than previously?
Probably not really. I don't know. It's the club's easier to deal with, I think. Certainly. Well, certainly easier to deal with than when I was banned from press conferences. And
Sorry, I completely forgot about that, Phil.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The manager is obviously much easier to deal with than most managers we've had in recent years, which I think really does help. There's always rumours floating about. I think this summer there's been because we're probably one of the few clubs in the Championship that have got a load of money. Anyone who's an agent who's got a player that's interesting a club is mentioning us as a kind of rival club for that. Do you see what I mean? That our name is getting mentioned as a potential rival. So there's a lot of stuff that gets around. But the club is things get out, and the club at the moment I think is easier to speak to and have conversations with when stories do come up than it has been. I think. Generally I think that there has been a conscious effort to be easy to deal with, I think, and not just in terms of media, but in terms of fans as well. I think there's been a sort of that has been an intention, the community being seen as such a central part of everything, which is laudable. And I think how everyone would want to see their club. I think they kind of get that. Bobby Robson called Ipswich his big little club, didn't he? And so in one sense, Ipswich is a very big club, but in another sense, it's got that sort of community feel of a Colchester United or that sort of level. I know they'll not like that, but you know what I mean. That sort of smaller level club, because it's really only 60 years when 60 years ago we were that sort of club. So and those sort of things kind of remain in clubs over a period of time. Do you know what I mean? I think that's that expectation.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The culture of the club. Yeah.
Joe, a lot of love for your cricket shirt. I couldn't care less. But do you want to give us your Ashes predictions for Louis? You're muted again, mate.
Losing Jack Leach is a real blow, so I think that's sort of maybe tipped the balance slightly back into Australia's favour. But still relatively confident we can take it. But we'll see how Bazball works in an Ashes series.
And one for you here. Early days, I know transfer exits, etc. But who do we think will win the Championship as it currently stands, apart from Ipswich?
Cool. That's quite difficult, isn't it? I don't know who would you think is coming out of the relegated teams who is in the stronger position? It's quite difficult to judge, I would say, at the moment. Really, I think that there's a lot of summer to go with those clubs.
The difficult thing is, Southampton have appointed Russell Martin, or about to appoint, or have been about to appoint him for ages, and I'm not particularly convinced by him as a manager. Still.
No, I'm not.
They do a lot of passing, and Leeds and Leicester haven't got a manager in place yet, so
No.
it's hard to say. But I think, like I say, Leicester will probably start the season as the favourites. I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, but I do kind of think that they are a bit of a mess from what the words that I hear, and so. And as you say, manager situation with those clubs, the longer it drags on, the sort of less time they've got to prepare themselves. You can see those clubs having poor starts to the season just because of August. It does become a time of still doing their business, doesn't it? Really, with players leaving and others coming in. So it'd be nice to play one or two of them fairly early in the campaign. But
6-0, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
That would be nice. Yeah, we did start a league campaign. We got relegated and beat Leicester 6-1, didn't we? But yeah, I think it'll be one of those three, I would guess. I don't know, Leeds maybe Leeds their strength will ultimately come.
Big fan base to keep happy, isn't it? We'll talk about that. I think we'll be previewing the season in great detail. So do subscribe, as we say. Plenty more content around our Championship rivals coming up on Blue Monday. Mark's new. I think interested if that's their name. Apologies if it is your name, but the question makes me think otherwise. Will Phil Ham bring out TWTD merch soon? And we've obviously got our podcast rivals also have some as well. Are you going to get some TWTD merch?
Well, we haven't done any for a while, have we? Maybe that's something we perhaps think about this year. I think I think the kind of lack of success over recent years kind of saw our merch sort of disappear. Really, do you know what I mean? It was It's always easier to sell merchandise in a sort of positive moment. It's not something we've done too much thought about this summer, but yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's something perhaps for the future.
Never say never. I've actually reached the end of the questions, and it's good job too, because we're at just before an hour and 10, and I like nice round numbers. So I'll say, Phil, thank you for joining us, guesting as you have and providing your insights. Anything you want to plug apart from head to twtd.co.uk?
Just go to the website every day, click loads of adverts.
Get on the message boards, contribute that.
For completing questionnaires and visiting the site and all that kind of stuff. It's it's all very nice of everybody, and looking forward to another successful season.
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Great stuff. Joe, great to chat with you. Enjoy the Ashes. Couldn't care less, I'm afraid, although I want England to win most things, so that's the limit. But we've got a super chat just at the last as well. So C London, maybe I'm confused. Yeah, thank you, C London. I think there's an alias there, definitely. So thank you for that. If you want to do that before we go, now is the time. But otherwise, we'll say thank you to Joe. We'll see you soon, no doubt. And Phil, get the laptop powered up, get Osborne 3.0. We're upgrading now, we're in the championship. But thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you. Please do give us a thumbs up before you head off, and keep your eyes on Blue Monday, ITFC.co.uk, all of our content there. We've got some archived interviews from Phil and I with the likes of Ian Westlake as well. So in this downtime before stuff kicks off, do head back onto our YouTube channel and our podcast feed and checks out some of those interviews as well. But for now, I will say thank you guys. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you soon.